My 10-year-old niece called me crying in the middle of a massive Atlanta thunderstorm. Auntie Naomi, please help me. I am so hungry, and the water is rising in the basement. My heart stopped. She was supposed to be safe living in my parents' sprawling mansion. I drove through the blinding rain and kicked down their basement door. What I found shivering in the dark completely shattered whatever was left of my family. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to rescue a loved one from the very people who were supposed to protect them. My name is Naomi, and I am 32 years old. I work as a forensic accountant here in Atlanta, but tonight my only job was survival. It was exactly 11 o'clock on a Saturday night. The rain was lashing against my penthouse windows when my phone lit up with my brother Marcus's number. I almost did not answer. Marcus only called when he needed a bailout or cash for his gambling debts. Marcus was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong, the one who drained my parents' bank accounts to fund his fake business ventures, while I was the outcast for simply demanding accountability. I built my career from the ground up without a single dime from them, but in their eyes I was always the rebellious daughter who did not respect the family legacy. But something made me pick up. It was not Marcus. It was Zuri, his 10-year-old daughter from his first marriage. Her biological mother, a beautiful black woman who actually loved her, had passed away 3 years ago. Since then, Zuri had been living in a nightmare disguised as privilege. Her voice was barely a whisper over the sound of thunder. Auntie Naomi, please, you have to come get me. Zuri, baby, what is wrong? Where is your dad? Where are Grandma Beatrice and Grandpa Isaiah? They left me. She choked out a sob, a sound so full of despair it made my blood run cold. They went to the church gala this afternoon. Brittany said I was being bad, so she locked the basement door from the outside. The power went out hours ago, and the water is coming in under the walls. I am so cold, Auntie. There is no food down here. I did not ask any more questions. I grabbed my keys and ran. The drive to the affluent Buckhead neighborhood usually takes 30 minutes. I made it in 15, tearing through red lights and flooded intersections. My parents, Pastor Isaiah and First Lady Beatrice, practically ruled the local megachurch. Their brick mansion, with its perfectly manicured lawns and towering columns, was a symbol of their so-called generational excellence. They preached about family values every Sunday to thousands of devoted followers. They smiled for the cameras. They collected the tithes. But standing on their porch in the pouring rain, I knew their holy kingdom was nothing but a tomb. I pounded on the custom oak front doors. Nothing. The house was completely dark except for the security lights. I ran around to the back of the house toward the basement entrance. The water in the yard was already ankle-deep, forming muddy pools around the foundation. I pulled on the heavy basement door. It was deadbolted from the outside, just like Zuri said. Brittany, my brother's new white fiancée, had deliberately locked a 10-year-old black child in a basement during a severe storm warning. Brittany loved to play the white savior on social media, posting pictures with Zuri to show how progressive and loving she was. But behind closed doors, she treated my niece like an unwanted pest. I did not hesitate. I picked up a heavy stone planter from my mother's prized patio collection and smashed it directly into the glass pane of the door. The glass shattered outward into the storm. I reached through, ignoring the sharp edges biting into my forearm, and unlocked the deadbolt. The smell of damp mildew and cold concrete hit me instantly. I turned on my phone flashlight and waded into the darkness. The basement was supposed to be a storage area, but the floor was covered in an inch of freezing water. Zuri, I yelled, my voice echoing off the concrete walls. A tiny whimper came from the far corner inside a small storage closet. I splashed over and pulled the closet door open. Zuri was curled into a tight ball on a pile of old moving blankets. She was wearing a thin summer nightgown, completely soaked through from the rising water. She was shivering so violently her teeth were chattering. I dropped to my knees and scooped her into my arms. Her skin was burning hot against my wet clothes. She easily had a fever of 104. Her breathing was shallow and ragged, a dangerous sign for a child who already struggled with respiratory issues. I am here, baby, I whispered, pulling off my dry coat and wrapping it tightly around her frail body. Let us get you something to eat. I carried her upstairs to the main kitchen. The massive double-door refrigerator was fully stocked with expensive catering leftovers from my parents' endless social events. Platters of roasted meats, gourmet cheeses, and organic fruits sat perfectly arranged. But when I looked at the basement stairs, I realized Zuri could never have reached any of it, even if the door was not locked. They had left her down there with absolutely nothing, not a bottle of water, not a single blanket, just cold concrete and rising water. I grabbed a bottle of water and held it to her lips. She drank it so fast she choked. Anger, unlike anything I had ever experienced in my 32 years of life, began to boil in my veins. This was not just neglect. This was intentional cruelty. My parents, who preached love and charity to thousands every Sunday, had allowed this woman, Brittany, to treat their own granddaughter like a stray animal. They turned a blind eye because Marcus wanted a white trophy wife, and Brittany wanted the status of marrying into a prominent church family. Zuri was just collateral damage in their twisted pursuit of image. I held Zuri tight against my chest, feeling her tiny heart beating erratically. We are leaving right now. I am taking you to the hospital. Just as I stepped out of the broken back door and carried her toward my car, the blinding glare of headlights swept across the flooded driveway. A black Lincoln Navigator pulled through the custom wrought iron gates. The engine hummed smoothly as it parked right next to my vehicle. The doors opened and out stepped my family. My father, Pastor Isaiah, stepped down in a crisp, tailored tuxedo, holding an umbrella over his head. My mother, Beatrice, followed wearing a shimmering gold evening gown, adjusting her diamond earrings. Marcus climbed out from the driver's side, laughing loudly at something. And finally, Brittany stepped out, smoothing down her expensive silk dress and complaining about the rain ruining her blowout. They smelled of expensive champagne and roasted prime rib. They were completely intoxicated with their own status and entirely oblivious to the shattered glass and the freezing child in my arms. My mother froze when she saw me standing in the driveway, rain pouring down my face, holding Zuri wrapped in my coat. Her smile vanished instantly, replaced by that familiar look of absolute disdain she always reserved just for me. She marched through the deep puddles with her gold evening gown dragging heavily in the mud. She did not look at the shivering child in my arms. She did not look at Zuri's blue lips or her sunken cheeks. She did not look at the violent shaking, consuming the little girl's frail frame. She looked straight past us, staring only at the shattered glass of the basement entrance. The heavy thud of her palm striking my cheek echoed louder than the thunder rolling above us. The sudden stinging heat radiated across my jaw. You broke my imported oak door. Are you out of your mind, Naomi? That glass is custom made from Italy. Not a single word about the child in my arms. Not a single breath wasted on her granddaughter who was burning up with a fever of 104. Just the door. The imported oak door. The imported oak door mattered more than Zuri's life. Pastor Isaiah stepped forward immediately. His booming pulpit voice vibrated through the freezing rain. What is the meaning of this disruption? We just left the 30-year anniversary gala of this ministry. We are completely exhausted. Put that child down and get off my property before I call the police for vandalism. I tightened my grip on Zuri. My cheek burned from the slap, but the fire inside my chest was infinitely hotter. I looked at the man who preached about salvation and grace every Sunday morning to thousands of cheering congregants. The man who demanded 10% of everyone else's income, but could not spare an ounce of mercy for his own flesh and blood. Then the passenger door of the Lincoln Navigator swung open wider. Chloe stepped out under a massive golf umbrella held by the driver. Her skin was pristine white, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her designer heels stepping delicately around the muddy puddles to avoid ruining her pedicure. She looked at us standing in the freezing rain and rolled her eyes with an exaggerated, heavy sigh. Oh, for heaven's sake, is she throwing another tantrum? Marcus, tell your sister to stop interfering with our parenting. Zuri is just faking it to get attention because we did not take her to the gala tonight. She does this all the time. It is exhausting dealing with her behavior. Faking it. I stared at this woman in absolute disgust. This woman who posted daily on Instagram about the profound joys of raising a beautiful black stepdaughter. This woman who reaps all the social rewards of playing the white savior in our community while literally locking that same child in a flooded basement to starve in the dark. She has a fever of 104, Chloe. She is suffering from severe hypothermia. She has not eaten since yesterday morning. Chloe scoffed, waving her manicured hand in the air. You people are always so dramatic, always blowing things completely out of proportion just to start a fight. Just like when you accused Marcus of stealing your college tuition money. You just cannot stand to see us happy, Naomi. You cannot stand that Marcus chose me to build his legacy while you sit alone in your apartment. There it was. The tuition money. The $75,000 my grandmother had left specifically for me to attend Spelman College. Marcus had drained the entire account to cover his massive sports gambling debts and to buy his way into an elite fraternity. When I found out the truth and brought the bank statements to my parents, they called me a liar to my face. They said I was jealous. They said I was trying to destroy the family name with false accusations. They protected him. They protected the golden son. They protected the heir to their holy empire. They protected the thief and threw me out into the street with nothing but a garbage bag of clothes. This has nothing to do with your fake marriage, Chloe. This is about child abuse. Marcus finally stepped forward from the vehicle. He puffed out his chest, trying to use his physical size to intimidate me, just like he did when we were kids. The potent smell of expensive scotch rolled off his breath, mixing with the rain. He was wearing a custom tuxedo paid for by the congregation's tithes. Give me my daughter, Naomi. You are trespassing on private property. You have absolutely no rights here. Hand her over right now, or I will lay you out right here in the mud. He reached out his large hands, grabbing aggressively at Zuri's thin arm. Zuri screamed a weak, terrified sound that broke my heart into a million jagged pieces. She clung to my neck, burying her face deep into my wet coat. She was terrified of her own father. She was terrified of the man who was supposed to be her ultimate protector. I did not step back. I did not flinch. I shifted Zuri's weight entirely to my left arm, holding her securely against my hip. With my right hand, I reached deep into my coat pocket and pulled out a canister of police-grade pepper spray. I raised my arm and aimed the nozzle directly at the center of Marcus's face. My hand did not shake. My voice did not waver. Take one more step, Marcus. Take one single step toward this child and I will blind you. I will burn your eyes out right here in front of your precious white wife and your holy parents. Marcus froze instantly. He recognized the cold, dead look in my eyes. It was the look of a woman who had absolutely nothing left to lose. A woman who had survived the unforgiving streets of Atlanta after her own family discarded her like trash. A woman who had built a forensic accounting empire by destroying corrupt men exactly like him. He raised his hands slowly, taking a very cautious step backward into the rain. Beatrice gasped loudly, clutching her diamond necklace. You are a monster, Naomi. You are a demon sent to test our faith. God will punish you for pulling a weapon on your own brother. God is not here tonight, Mother. Only me. And I am taking this child to the emergency room. I turned around, holding Zuri as tight as I possibly could. The rain was blinding, but my vision had never been clearer in my entire life. I walked quickly toward my car, leaving them standing completely stunned in the flooded driveway. Chloe's shrill voice cut sharply through the storm. You cannot just take her. That is kidnapping. We will have you arrested and thrown in jail. You are just a bitter, lonely woman who cannot get a man of her own. I opened the passenger door of my car and carefully placed Zuri inside, buckling the seatbelt securely around her shivering frame. I turned back to look at the four of them one last time. The pillars of the community. The perfect Christian family. The wealthy philanthropists. They were nothing but monsters dressed in designer clothes. They were parasites feeding off the vulnerable to maintain their illusion of grandeur. Meet me at the hospital. Or meet me at the police station. It is your choice. But know this. If you try to stop me tonight, I will show the authorities exactly what I found in that basement. I will show the entire congregation what their beloved first family really does behind closed doors. I slammed the car door shut, cutting off Marcus's enraged shouting. I jumped into the driver's seat and locked the doors instantly. As I threw the car into reverse, my bright headlights washed over their furious, panicked faces. Beatrice was screaming into the rain, pointing wildly at my vehicle. Isaiah was holding his chest in exaggerated outrage. Chloe was desperately pulling at Marcus's arm, acting the delicate victim. I pressed the gas pedal hard, and the tires squealed violently against the wet pavement. I left them in the darkness. I left the sprawling mansion behind. My hands gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned pure white. Zuri coughed a deep rattling sound from her chest. Her small hand reached out and weakly tugged at my wet sleeve. Auntie Naomi, are they going to take me back to the dark room? I looked at her through the rear-view mirror. I looked at the hollows of her cheeks. I looked at the sheer terror in her beautiful brown eyes. They broke my spirit when I was 18, but I rebuilt it stone by stone. They stole my future, but I forged a brand new one with my own 2 hands. They took my money. They took my peace, but they were trying to take her life. They will never touch this child again. Never again. Never again. No, baby. I said, my voice absolute and unyielding. They are never taking you back. The reign of Pastor Isaiah and his golden son ends tonight. I sped down the dark, winding roads of Buckhead, heading straight for Atlanta General Hospital. The storm raged outside violently, but the real hurricane was sitting right here in the driver's seat. They underestimated me for the very last time. They thought I was just the discarded daughter they could push around forever. They forgot that the discarded daughter is now a forensic accountant who knows exactly how to find buried secrets. And this family has a massive graveyard of secrets waiting to be unearthed. The blinding fluorescent lights of Atlanta General Hospital were a harsh contrast to the dark, violent storm outside. I rushed through the automatic emergency doors, completely soaked and shivering, carrying Zuri tight against my chest. I screamed for help, and the triage nurses swarmed us instantly. They took one look at Zuri with her pale, ashen face and blue lips, and immediately lifted her onto a gurney, rushing her back into the trauma bay. I was left standing alone in the sterile waiting room, covered in mud and freezing rainwater. The adrenaline that had fueled me through the break-in was slowly wearing off, replaced by a gnawing, terrifying anxiety. I paced the linoleum floor for 2 agonizing hours, jumping at every sound and staring at the double doors, waiting for any news. When Dr. Evans finally walked out to meet me, his expression was incredibly grim. He pulled me aside into a small consultation room and closed the door. He told me they had managed to stabilize her fever, but her condition was critical. She had acute pneumonia exacerbated by the severe cold and dampness of the basement. But that was not the worst of it. The doctor opened her medical file and pointed to her blood work. He explained that Zuri was suffering from chronic malnutrition and severe vitamin deficiencies. Her bone density and weight were dangerously low for a 10-year-old child. This was not the result of missing one meal. This was systemic, long-term starvation. The doctor looked me dead in the eye, his voice dropping to a serious professional tone. He asked me exactly how long she had been deprived of food and proper care. I did not sugarcoat a single detail. I told him exactly where I found her, how the door was locked from the outside, and how her father and stepmother had left her there to attend a party. Dr. Evans nodded, his jaw tight with anger, and stated that hospital protocol required him to contact Child Protective Services immediately. I told him to make the call. I even gave him the names and address myself, ensuring the official report was filed right there on the spot. I knew this meant crossing a line with my family that could never be uncrossed, but I did not care. It did not take long for the devils to arrive. The heavy emergency room doors flew open, and my family marched into the waiting area like they owned the entire building. They were still dressed in their ridiculous gala attire, making a massive, disruptive scene in the quiet hospital wing. My father, Pastor Isaiah Sterling, led the pack. His face was twisted in a silent, furious rage that he usually kept carefully hidden behind his polished pulpit persona. Marcus looked panicked and sweaty, while my mother Beatrice and Chloe flanked them, looking around the working-class emergency room with absolute open disgust. They marched straight toward me, bypassing the reception desk entirely. My father did not ask about Zuri. He did not ask if his granddaughter was breathing or if her dangerous fever had broken. He did not ask what the doctors had said. He marched right up to my face and grabbed my upper arm so hard, his large fingers dug painfully into my muscle. He physically dragged me away from the other waiting families toward a quiet, deserted corner of the hallway. His voice was a terrifying low hiss vibrating with pure malice. "You call that agency right now and you tell them it was a massive misunderstanding." He ordered, his grip tightening on my arm. "You tell them you overreacted because you are emotional. Do you hear me, Naomi? You will withdraw that CPS report immediately. Tomorrow is Sunday morning. We have a broadcast service going out to 50,000 people across the country. The press will be there for the anniversary celebration. Are you trying to completely destroy the Sterling family name over a simple disciplinary measure?" I yanked my arm out of his violent grip with so much force he stumbled back a step. I stared at the man I used to call Dad, feeling nothing but pure, unfiltered revulsion. I looked at his immaculate grooming, his silk tie, and the gold Rolex watch flashing under the harsh hospital lights. A watch I knew cost more than what most of his congregation made in a year. "Family name." I scoffed, the sound echoing loudly off the linoleum walls. "You really want to talk about the family name right now? What about the reputation of a holy man wearing a $5,000 Armani suit who lets his own flesh and blood starve in a flooded basement? You care more about your offering plates tomorrow morning than the fact that your granddaughter has acute pneumonia. Do you know the doctor diagnosed her with chronic malnutrition? She is starving, Isaiah. She is starving in your multi-million-dollar house while you feast on catered prime rib. You are a complete fraud." My mother gasped loudly, clutching her chest like she was going to faint from my disrespect, but Chloe quickly stepped forward, pushing her way to the front. The fake, sweet smile she constantly used for her social media followers was completely gone. Her blue eyes were cold, calculating, and utterly devoid of any human empathy. She dropped the delicate victim act and went full villain, weaponizing her privilege without a second thought. She pulled her phone from her designer clutch and tapped the screen aggressively, holding it up directly in my face. "You really think you can win this game, Naomi?" Chloe sneered, her voice dripping with absolute venom. "You are nothing but an estranged, bitter aunt with a massive chip on her shoulder. You have no money, no husband, and no standing in this community. I am her legal stepmother. Marcus has full legal custody of that child. You have absolutely zero rights to her. You are a nobody." I stood my ground, refusing to let her white privilege intimidate me into backing down. "The doctors have the medical records, Chloe." I said, my voice steady and deadly calm. "They have the blood tests proving you have been starving her for months. CPS is already building a criminal case against you and Marcus. Your fake custody papers will not save you from a child abuse conviction." But Chloe just smirked, a chilling, highly satisfied smile that made my stomach drop. She was not panicking. She had been planning her next move since the moment I sped out of their driveway. She turned her head toward the emergency room entrance and raised her hand, signaling someone in the lobby. I turned and watched in absolute horror as two uniformed Atlanta police officers walked through the automatic sliding doors, their hands resting casually on their utility belts. They walked straight past the triage desk and headed directly toward our corner of the hallway. As they approached, Chloe turned back to me, and her demeanor changed in a split second. Her smirk vanished, replaced by wide, terrified eyes. Her voice suddenly grew loud and trembled with fake, panicked tears, perfectly timed and perfectly pitched for the approaching officers to hear. "Officer, thank God you are finally here," Chloe cried out, pointing a manicured, trembling finger right at my chest. "This woman broke into our home tonight, smashed our glass door, and took my daughter. She is completely unhinged. Please arrest her. She is trying to kidnap my child." The two Atlanta police officers advanced toward me with their hands resting cautiously on their utility belts. The taller officer, a man with a stern face and a commanding presence, instructed me to hand the child over to her parents and place my hands where he could see them. The entire waiting room fell dead silent. Everyone was watching to see if the angry black woman in the soaked coat was going to resist arrest. Marcus puffed out his chest, standing behind the officers with a smug, victorious grin. Chloe pressed her face into my mother's shoulder, pretending to weep uncontrollably. I did not raise my voice. I did not move frantically. I held Zuri firmly against my hip and looked directly into the taller officer's eyes. I told him my hands were visible and I was going to reach into my left breast pocket to retrieve my identification. I moved with slow, deliberate precision. Instead of pulling out a weapon or acting erratic, I produced my leather credential case and flipped it open. The silver badge of a senior forensic accountant gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights alongside my state identification card. I am Naomi Sterling, I stated, my voice echoing clearly down the quiet corridor. I am a licensed forensic financial investigator, and the child in my arms is my biological niece Zuri. She is currently suffering from acute hypothermia and severe malnutrition. If you want to know who the real criminals are in this hallway, I suggest you ask the attending physician. Right on cue, Dr. Evans stepped out of the consultation room. He was holding Zuri's medical chart tightly against his chest, his face dark with professional outrage. He did not care about my father's expensive suit or my mother's diamond jewelry. He looked at the two officers and introduced himself as the head of pediatric emergency medicine. He informed them that he had just filed an urgent report with Child Protective Services. This child has a core temperature of 99 degrees, dropping rapidly from a severe fever. Dr. Evans reported, his tone clipped and furious. She has contusions on her upper arms consistent with being forcibly grabbed. Her blood work indicates she has been deprived of basic nutrients for months. She is severely underweight. Her aunt brought her in after finding her locked in a flooded basement. If these people are her legal guardians, they are not taking her anywhere tonight except possibly into your custody. The atmosphere in the hallway shifted instantly. The officers' hands dropped from their belts. They turned their attention away from me and focused their hardened gazes entirely on Marcus and Chloe. The smug grin vanished from my brother's face, replaced by a sudden pale panic. He took a step backward, bumping into a medical cart. Chloe's fake sobbing stopped abruptly. She lowered her hands from her face, her mouth hanging slightly open as she realized her white privilege was not going to magically erase a doctor's objective medical evaluation. My mother, Beatrice, saw the tide turning against her golden son. She could not handle the reality of her perfect image crumbling in a public hospital. She threw herself forward, grabbing the taller officer's arm with a theatrical gasp. "Officer, you must listen to me," Beatrice cried out, her voice shaking with manufactured heartbreak. "My daughter, Naomi, is deeply unwell. She is mentally unstable and refuses to take her medication. She has been obsessed with destroying her brother's life ever since he found happiness." She pointed a trembling finger at Chloe. "Look at my beautiful daughter-in-law. Naomi is just a bitter, jealous woman. She hates that Marcus married a perfect white woman. She hates our beautiful blended family. She fabricated this entire story about a basement and starved her own niece tonight just to frame them." Chloe immediately caught on to the performance and chimed in, her voice dripping with fake agony. "I try so hard to love that little black girl as if she were my very own flesh and blood. I buy her everything. I give her everything. And Naomi just wants to tear us apart because she is miserable and entirely alone. Please, officer, do not let this crazy woman steal my baby." I stood there holding my sick niece, listening to my own mother assassinate my character to protect a child abuser. It was the ultimate betrayal, but it did not break me. It only hardened the armor I had spent years building. I looked at Beatrice with absolute ice in my veins. "Mental illness does not create severe vitamin deficiencies, Mother," I countered, my voice cutting through her hysterical performance like a scalpel. "Jealousy does not create fingerprint bruises on a 10-year-old girl's arms. You can spin whatever twisted narrative you want for your church congregation, but the medical evidence in that doctor's hand does not lie. And unlike you, I do not need a man to validate my existence. I just need the law." The officers exchanged a long look. They conferred quietly with Dr. Evans, who aggressively tapped the medical chart to emphasize his findings. The taller officer finally turned back to Marcus and Chloe. He informed them that based on the attending physician's assessment and the pending Child Protective Services investigation, they were prohibited from taking the child home. He ordered them to leave the hospital premises immediately or face arrest for creating a public disturbance and interfering with a medical emergency. Marcus's face contorted with pure rage. He lunged forward, pointing a threatening finger at my face. "You are dead, Naomi. Do you hear me? You are absolutely dead. I am calling my lawyers right now. You will never see her again." The second officer immediately placed his hand squarely on Marcus's chest, pushing him back with significant force. The officer warned him that making threats in front of law enforcement was a fantastic way to end up in handcuffs. My father, realizing they had completely lost control of the situation, grabbed Marcus by the shoulder. Isaiah's face was a mask of seething humiliation. He glared at me, promising silent retribution before practically dragging his son toward the exit. Beatrice and Chloe followed closely behind their designer heels, clicking frantically against the floor as they fled the consequences of their actions. Once the hallway was clear, the officers approached me. They took my official statement and informed me that due to the emergency circumstances, Dr. Evans had authorized a temporary medical hold. I was granted emergency guardianship for the night while the child remained under hospital care. The real legal battle would begin in the morning when the social workers arrived, but for tonight, Zuri was finally safe. Hours later, the adrenaline completely left my system. The hospital ward was dark and quiet, filled only with the rhythmic beeping of heart monitors. I sat in a plastic chair pulled right up to Zuri's hospital bed. She was sleeping peacefully, an intravenous line delivering warm fluids and antibiotics into her small hand. Her breathing had finally leveled out. I watched her chest rise and fall, feeling a profound sense of protective love that overwhelmed my exhaustion. I noticed her torn, filthy backpack sitting on a plastic chair in the corner of the room. The paramedics had brought it in with her. I walked over and picked it up, hoping to find a dry pair of socks or maybe a favorite stuffed animal to comfort her when she woke up. The fabric was frayed and smelled heavily of mildew. I unzipped the main compartment, finding only a few crumpled school assignments and broken crayons. As I ran my hand along the bottom, my fingers brushed against a strange tear in the lining. There was something hidden inside the thin nylon gap. I carefully worked 2 fingers into the hole and pulled out a small crumpled piece of paper. I carried it over to the dim light above the hospital bed and smoothed out the deep creases. It was a bank transfer slip. It was incredibly old, the ink slightly faded, but the printed words were unmistakable. My breath caught in my throat as I read the name listed as the primary account holder. It was Maya Sterling, Zuri's late mother. I stared at the numbers printed on the receipt. It showed a massive transfer of funds moving from a secure trust account into a secondary offshore holding account. The transaction date was logged just 3 days after Maya's tragic death. My forensic accounting instincts instantly flared to life, analyzing the routing numbers and the specific sequence of the wire transfer. Marcus had always claimed Maya left them with nothing but crushing medical debt. He used that narrative to solicit thousands of dollars in donations from my parents' church members. But this crumpled piece of paper told a completely different story. It told a story of hidden wealth, of stolen assets, and of a massive financial cover-up. I folded the bank slip carefully and slid it into my wallet. They thought they were just fighting an angry sister for custody of a child they did not even want. They had no idea they had just handed a master financial investigator the exact thread needed to unravel their entire fraudulent empire. The crumpled piece of paper felt heavy in my hand as I sat down at my desk the next morning. My home office was a quiet fortress of glowing monitors and stacked financial files, a stark contrast to the chaos of the hospital the night before. I smoothed out the faded bank transfer slip I had pulled from the hidden lining of Zuri's torn backpack. Maya Sterling. That was the name printed across the top line. Zuri's mother had been a brilliant woman, a software developer who worked tirelessly before the illness took her life. Marcus had always painted her as a tragic charity case who left him drowning in medical debt. My parents used that exact narrative to solicit prayer offerings and sympathy donations from their massive congregation. But the numbers staring back at me from this fragile slip of paper told a completely different story. I booted up my primary workstation. As a senior forensic accountant, I utilize tracking software that can follow a single diverted penny across the globe. I typed the routing and account numbers from Maya's slip into my secure database. I hit enter and waited for the encrypted financial institution files to decrypt. When the ledger finally populated on my center screen, my breath completely caught in my throat. It was a trust fund, an irrevocable trust established exactly 1 month before Maya passed away. The designated beneficiary was Zuri Sterling. The total principal amount was $2 million. Maya had known she was dying, and she had poured every ounce of her life savings, her stock options, and her corporate life insurance payouts into an ironclad account to protect her little girl. She had done everything right, but she severely underestimated the sheer greed of the Sterling family. I began running a deep, comprehensive audit on the transaction history. I watched the money sit untouched, earning interest for exactly 3 days after Maya's funeral. Then the bleeding started. Massive wire transfers were initiated. 50,000 here, 100,000 there. I pulled the digital authorization forms attached to the withdrawals. The primary signature claimed to be Marcus acting as the legal guardian, but the secondary authorization, the guarantor signature required to bypass the trust's early withdrawal penalties, belonged to my father. Pastor Isaiah Sterling had used his immense legal standing and his immaculate public credit rating to personally vouch for the transfers. My own father, the man who preached passionately about protecting the innocent every Sunday morning, had actively helped his son rob a grieving child blind. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I needed to see exactly where the money went. I initiated a reverse trace on the outgoing wires. Marcus was a notorious gambling addict, but he was not nearly smart enough to hide $2 million on his own without raising flags with the Internal Revenue Service. The money did not go to offshore betting accounts or luxury car dealerships. It went straight into the primary operating account of the Sterling family ministry. They used the church. They used the holy sanctuary as a literal money laundering machine. I tracked the funds mixing with the weekly tithes, the building fund donations, and the charity drives. They thought blending the stolen trust money with the congregation's legitimate cash would make it untraceable. They thought wrong. Forensic accounting is not just math, it is hunting, and I had just caught their exact scent. I isolated Maya's $2 million and followed the digital breadcrumbs as the money was funneled right back out the back door of the church. The outbound wires were heavily disguised as charitable outreach grants and community development investments. I clicked on the receiving accounts. 3 different limited liability companies popped up on my right monitor: Apex Holdings, Horizon Ventures, Blue Sky Enterprises. They were shell companies. They were completely hollow corporations set up with no actual business operations, no employees, and 0 public-facing footprints. I ran the tax identification numbers for all 3 entities through the state corporate registry. The results popped up instantly, illuminating the dark room with a sickening truth. The sole registered owner and managing director of every single shell company was Chloe Sterling. My white sister-in-law, who constantly complained on the internet about the terrible financial burden of raising a black stepdaughter, was sitting on top of a stolen $2 million fortune. She was not just playing the victim for sympathy likes on social media. She was the architect of a massive financial crime. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, my mind racing to put the pieces together. Why filter the money entirely through Chloe? Marcus was incredibly arrogant, but he was also extremely possessive of cash. He would never just hand over $2 million to his new wife without a specific endgame. I pulled up the most recent bank statements for Chloe's shell companies. The accounts were completely empty. The money had landed there, sat for a few months to cool off, and then immediately vanished again just 48 hours ago. I ran a global search on Chloe's social security number, cross-referencing it with county property records and major commercial loan approvals. A bright red flag popped up on my left monitor, signaling a massive finalized transaction that had just cleared the county clerk's office. I opened the digital deed and stared at the screen in absolute disbelief. Chloe had not spent the money on designer clothes or luxury vacations. She had used the entire $2 million of Zuri's stolen trust fund as a cash collateral down payment for a massive commercial real estate purchase in the heart of the Buckhead shopping district. It was a luxury retail complex worth easily $10 million. But the most horrifying detail was not the sheer scale of the purchase or the audacity of the theft. It was the name printed on the official property deed. The commercial complex was not deeded to Marcus. It was not deeded to the church or a joint marital trust. It was legally deeded solely and exclusively to Chloe. Marcus had helped her steal his own daughter's future, and Chloe had legally secured all of it entirely under her own name, leaving her arrogant husband completely exposed and holding an empty bag. I barely slept that night. The glow of my multiple monitors cast long, harsh shadows across my home office as I compiled every wire transfer, every forged signature, and every fraudulent property deed into a single encrypted master file. By the time the sun began to rise over the Atlanta skyline, I had enough concrete financial evidence to send my father, my brother, and my sister-in-law to federal prison for a very long time. I had the smoking gun. But while I was meticulously building an airtight criminal case rooted in hard facts, Chloe was busy doing what she did best. She was building a digital lynch mob. My phone started vibrating relentlessly against my glass desk just before 8 in the morning. It was not the hospital. It was not the police. It was an avalanche of notifications, alerts, and direct messages flooding my personal and business accounts at an unnatural speed. I picked up the device and saw hundreds of hateful messages pouring into my inbox by the second. I opened my social media application, and the reason for the digital onslaught immediately autoplayed on my screen. Chloe had posted a 6-minute video across all her platforms. She had clearly spent hours perfecting the aesthetic of a shattered victim. She was wearing a modest, oversized beige sweater, her blonde hair was deliberately messy, and her makeup was expertly applied to make her look exhausted and tear-stained. She sat on the floor of what looked like a nursery, clutching a small stuffed bear to her chest. The performance was Oscar-worthy. She stared directly into the camera with wide, innocent eyes, her voice trembling with manufactured heartbreak. She told her millions of followers that her family was being violently torn apart by a cruel and bitter aunt. She wept as she described how she had dedicated her entire life to being a perfect mother. I just wanted to love this beautiful orphaned black child as if she were my own flesh and blood. Chloe sobbed, wiping a carefully placed tear from her cheek. I have given her my whole heart, but my sister-in-law has always hated our beautiful blended family. She broke into our home and physically took my daughter away from me. And now she is trying to destroy my reputation with vicious lies. I am being discriminated against and targeted simply because I am a white woman trying to raise a child of color in a divided world. Please pray for my family. Please help me get my baby back. It was a masterclass in weaponized white tears. She seamlessly played the ultimate savior and the ultimate victim in the exact same breath. She completely omitted the flooded basement. She left out the severe hypothermia, the chronic starvation, and the pending Child Protective Services investigation. She packaged a narrative of reverse racism and jealous rage and served it on a silver platter to an internet audience desperate for outrage. The video went viral in a matter of minutes. By the time I finished watching it, the post had already amassed 2 million views and over 100,000 comments. The digital mob was out for blood, and Chloe had pointed them directly at me. They found my professional website. They found my business address. They uncovered my private contact information. The comment section was a cesspool of unhinged hatred and violent threats. They called me a monster. They called me a jealous, bitter hag who could not get a man of her own, so I had to steal another woman's child. They accused me of traumatizing an innocent little girl out of pure spite. They started tagging the Atlanta Police Department demanding my immediate arrest for kidnapping. Chloe's followers were organizing a campaign to destroy my life brick by brick. Then the real-world consequences began to manifest. At 9 o'clock sharp, my business line rang. It was the chief financial officer of a major logistics firm, one of my largest and most lucrative forensic accounting clients. His voice was incredibly tight and formal, lacking our usual easy rapport. "Naomi, we have a serious problem," the CFO said, his tone entirely devoid of warmth. "Our public relations department just flagged a massive social media scandal involving your name and allegations of child abduction and abuse. Our company is currently trending in the comments section because angry internet users are demanding we terminate our contract with you immediately. They are threatening to boycott our services if we continue to employ you." I sat perfectly still, listening to the panic in his voice. I knew exactly how corporate cowardice operated. "We cannot afford this kind of catastrophic negative exposure, Naomi." He continued, rushing through his words. "We are a family-oriented brand. We have to protect our shareholders and our market value. Until this terrible situation is fully resolved, we are suspending all active contracts with your firm. We are pulling our financial data from your servers today. I am sorry, but we have to distance ourselves from this radioactive PR nightmare." He hung up before I could even respond. Within the next hour, 3 more major corporate clients called to deliver the exact same speech. Chloe's viral hit piece was actively dismantling the highly respected forensic accounting firm I had spent the last decade building from the ground up. My inbox was overflowing with contract termination notices and hateful emails demanding I return the child to her loving stepmother. My phone buzzed again, displaying a text message from an unknown number. It was Marcus. "I told you that you were dead," the message read. "You messed with the wrong family, Naomi. Chloe controls the narrative now. Give Zuri back and drop the fake abuse charges, or we will make sure you lose absolutely everything. You will be homeless by the end of the week." I set the phone down on my desk. The screen was still flashing with incoming death threats and cancellation notices. A normal person would have panicked. A normal person would have immediately recorded a frantic response video, trying to defend their character against the crushing weight of public opinion. A normal person would have begged for mercy. I did not do any of those things. I leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair and let out a soft, genuine laugh. Chloe thought she was playing a game of social media chess. She thought public opinion and internet outrage were the ultimate weapons. She believed that controlling the digital narrative meant she controlled reality. But I was not playing chess. I was playing financial executioner. She was entirely focused on the court of public opinion while I was preparing to introduce her to the federal court of law. I walked into my kitchen, poured myself a fresh cup of hot black coffee, and walked right back to my command center. I took a slow, appreciative sip, letting the bitter caffeine wake up my exhausted senses. I did not post a frantic rebuttal on Instagram. I did not issue a defensive press release. I did not waste a single second engaging with a mob of strangers who knew nothing about the truth. Instead, I opened my heavily encrypted secure email client. I created a new message and addressed it directly to a highly placed contact I had cultivated over years of forensic investigations. The contact worked in the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service. I attached the massive digital dossier I had spent the entire night compiling. I attached Maya Sterling's original irrevocable trust documents. I attached the forged withdrawal authorizations bearing my father's signature. I attached the detailed routing numbers showing the $2 million being laundered through the supposedly tax-exempt accounts of the Sterling family ministry. I attached the incorporation papers for Chloe's hollow shell companies. And finally, I attached the undeniable crown jewel of the collection, the commercial property deed proving that Chloe had used stolen funds to purchase a $10 million retail complex exclusively under her own name. I moved my cursor to the subject line. I did not write anything emotional. I kept it purely professional, deadly, and precise, reporting massive tax fraud, money laundering, and the illegal diversion of protected trust assets by a registered religious organization. I typed out a brief message outlining the exact nature of the financial crimes, identifying the primary perpetrators as Pastor Isaiah Sterling, Marcus Sterling, and Chloe Sterling. I noted the exact dollar amount stolen and provided the direct digital path the money took from the victim's account into the commercial real estate market. I took one more sip of my coffee, the dark roast tasting exceptionally sweet this morning. I looked at Chloe's viral video still playing silently on my secondary monitor. She was weeping beautifully, her face a mask of tragic victimhood, while thousands of comments praised her bravery and cursed my name. Let them praise her. Let them validate her delusions. Let her enjoy this fleeting moment of internet supremacy. Because while she was busy commanding the attention of teenagers on the internet, I was summoning the most unforgiving and relentless entity in the United States government. They thought my power resided in my reputation. They thought taking away my clients would break my spirit. They entirely forgot that I make my living by destroying corrupt empires from the inside out. I moved my mouse over the send button. I smiled a cold, calculated smile in the empty room and clicked it. The encrypted file vanished into cyberspace, heading straight for federal agents who did not care about viral videos or white tears. The countdown to their absolute destruction had officially begun. I parked my car in the massive, sprawling parking lot of the Sterling Family Ministry early the next morning. The sheer size of the megachurch was a monument to my father's ego, with its towering glass facades and meticulously manicured grounds. I needed Zuri's original birth certificate and her mother's medical records to secure the permanent guardianship filing. I knew my father kept all crucial family documents locked in the executive archives of the administrative wing, keeping a tight, controlling grip on everyone's legal identity. The heavy mahogany doors of the sanctuary were unlocked for the early choir practice, allowing me to slip inside unnoticed. I walked down the plush, carpeted hallway of the executive suites, my heels sinking into the expensive fabric paid for by the very congregation they were actively defrauding. I had just retrieved the thick manila file from the family archives when a heavy hand slammed the office door shut behind me. I turned around to find Marcus blocking the only exit. He looked incredibly smug, wearing a tailored charcoal suit and a confident smirk that told me he had been eagerly watching the view count climb on Chloe's pathetic viral video. He thought he had completely destroyed my professional life. He thought he had won the war. He reached inside his custom jacket and pulled out a thick, banded stack of $100 bills. He tossed the money aggressively right at my face. The heavy stack struck my shoulder and hit the floor, scattering crisp bills across the expensive carpet. "Take that $5,000 and get out of our lives, Naomi," Marcus ordered, his voice dripping with pure, arrogant condescension. "Use it to pay your rent since your precious accounting clients are dropping you like a bad habit today. You thought you could come in here and play the hero, but you are nothing. You are a lonely, bitter woman, and you will always be a loser. Enjoy the weekend, because come Monday morning we are going straight to family court. I am taking that little brat back, and the judge is going to grant a permanent restraining order against you." I looked down at the money scattered around my feet. I knew this cash was just a tiny fraction of the wealth they had stolen from a dying woman to fund their lavish lifestyle. I did not bend down to pick it up. I did not flinch or show a single ounce of the fear he was so desperately trying to provoke. Instead, I took a slow, deliberate step forward, placing the sharp heel of my shoe directly onto the center of the largest pile of cash. I pressed down hard, grinding the faces of the $100 bills into the floorboards. I looked up and met his arrogant gaze with a perfectly calm, deadpan expression. "Keep the cash, Marcus," I said, my voice dropping to a low, chilling register. "You are going to need every single penny for your criminal defense fund, but you might want to enjoy it while you still can. I hear federal prison uniforms do not have pockets to hold money." I pushed past him, shoving my shoulder hard against his chest, and walked out of the office, leaving him standing in stunned silence. The absolute dead silence that fell over the courtroom was deafening. Chloe's jaw dropped open, the tissue falling from her manicured hand onto the floor. Marcus leaped to his feet, his chair crashing backward into the wooden railing. My father grabbed his chest, his face turning an alarming shade of gray. The performance was over. The family facade was completely shattered. I stood in the center of the room, holding the key to their absolute destruction, and smiled a cold, unforgiving smile. Harrison Cole was the first to break the paralysis. He slammed his hands down on the defense table, his voice booming with forced professional outrage. Objection! Objection, Your Honor! This is a baseless, malicious slander. Miss Sterling is attempting to hijack a simple family court proceeding with wildly fabricated financial accusations. I demand this be stricken from the record and that Miss Sterling be held in contempt of court immediately. Judge Vance did not bang her gavel. She did not yell. She simply leaned forward over her high wooden desk, interlacing her fingers. She looked at the printed piece of paper in my hand, and then shifted her sharp, judicial gaze to the panic-stricken faces of the Sterling family. She was a judge who had presided over thousands of bitter custody disputes, but the sheer terror radiating from my father and brother was impossible to ignore. "Are you submitting this document into evidence, Miss Sterling?" Judge Vance asked, her voice dangerously calm. "Because making accusations of federal financial crimes in my courtroom is a very serious matter. If you are bluffing, I will have you escorted directly to a holding cell." I did not break eye contact with the judge. I walked over to the bailiff and handed him the printed bank transfer slip. "I am a licensed senior forensic accountant, Your Honor." I stated, my voice steady and echoing clearly off the walls. "I do not bluff, and I do not make accusations without a paper trail." That document is a verified transfer receipt showing $2 million moving out of an irrevocable trust established by the late Maya Sterling for the sole benefit of her minor daughter Zuri. The guarantor's signature on that unauthorized withdrawal belongs to Pastor Isaiah Sterling. My father let out a strangled, gasping sound, clutching his chest even tighter. Beatrice grabbed his arm, her perfectly powdered face draining of all color. Marcus looked like a cornered animal, his eyes darting frantically toward the courtroom exit, as if calculating his chances of outrunning a federal indictment. Chloe, however, was still trying to cling to the sinking ship. She gripped the edges of the witness stand, her knuckles turning pure white. "That is a lie," she screamed, her voice shrill and completely devoid of her earlier sweet southern charm. "It is a fabricated piece of garbage. My husband and his father are pillars of this community. They run a ministry. You cannot just come in here and wave a fake piece of paper around." I turned slowly to face her, letting her own panic fuel my confidence. "I did not stop there, Chloe." I continued, my voice rising to dominate the room. "Once I saw the money leave Zuri's trust, I tracked it. It did not go to her medical care. It did not go to her education. It was funneled directly into the primary operating accounts of the Sterling family ministry. From there, it was immediately redistributed, disguised as charitable grants, into 3 separate limited liability companies: Apex Holdings, Horizon Ventures, Blue Sky Enterprises. Harrison Cole was frantically whispering to Marcus, but Marcus was completely unresponsive, staring at me with wide, terrified eyes. "Would you care to tell the court who the sole registered owner of those 3 shell companies is, Mrs. Sterling?" I asked, stepping right up to the wooden partition of the witness stand. "Because the Georgia Secretary of State Corporate Registry confirms that every single one of those entities is registered exclusively under the name Chloe Sterling." Chloe opened her mouth, but no sound came out. The pristine white savior mask had been entirely ripped away, exposing the ruthless, calculating thief underneath. She looked at Marcus, desperately seeking an excuse, a lifeline, anything to save her. But Marcus was looking at her with a sudden, horrifying realization. I did not give her a chance to recover. I turned back to the judge, my voice ringing with finality. 48 hours ago, that stolen $2 million was wired out of those shell companies and used as a cash collateral down payment on a $10 million commercial retail complex in Buckhead. The property deed was finalized on Friday afternoon. And, Your Honor, the deed does not list Marcus Sterling. It does not list the church. The property is legally owned solely and exclusively by the woman sitting on that witness stand. Marcus whipped his head around to stare at his wife, his face contorted with a mixture of betrayal and absolute rage. What did she just say? He yelled, completely forgetting he was in a courtroom. "Chloe, what did she just say? The property is only in your name. We agreed we were putting it in the family trust. We agreed." Chloe shrank back into the witness chair, her eyes darting like a trapped rat. "Marcus, I can explain. It was just a temporary legal maneuver for tax purposes. The lawyers told me it was safer. You lying, scheming thief! Marcus roared, lunging forward toward the witness stand. You set me up. You used my father to drain the account, and then you cut me out. The courtroom exploded into absolute chaos. The bailiff rushed forward, grabbing Marcus by the shoulders and shoving him back toward the defense table. My father collapsed into his chair, groaning and clutching his heart, while Beatrice screamed for a doctor. Harrison Cole was frantically shouting objections and trying to restrain his client, but Marcus was completely unhinged, shouting obscenities at his wife, who was now cowering behind the wooden partition. Judge Vance hammered her gavel repeatedly against the sound block, the sharp cracks cutting through the shouting. "Order in my courtroom!" she yelled, her voice booming with absolute authority. "Bailiff, restrain Mr. Sterling immediately. If anyone else speaks out of turn, I will clear this entire room and hold you all in contempt." The bailiff forced Marcus into his chair, standing directly behind him with his hand resting firmly on his utility belt. The shouting subsided into heavy, ragged breathing and the stifled sobs of my mother. Judge Vance glared down at the defense table, her eyes blazing with fury. She picked up the bank transfer slip I had submitted and examined it closely for several long, agonizing moments. "Mr. Cole," Judge Vance finally spoke, her voice laced with ice. "It appears your clients have significantly larger problems today than an emergency guardianship dispute. I am maintaining the temporary medical hold. Miss Naomi Sterling will retain emergency physical and legal custody of the minor child Zuri Sterling until further notice. Furthermore, I am ordering an immediate emergency injunction freezing all assets connected to Marcus Sterling, Chloe Sterling, and the Sterling Family Ministry pending a full federal financial review." Harrison Cole stood up, his slick confidence entirely gone. He looked like a man who realized he was standing on the deck of the Titanic. "Your Honor, you cannot freeze the church assets based on one unverified document. I can, and I just did." Judge Vance snapped, cutting him off. "I am also forwarding this entire transcript and the submitted evidence directly to the District Attorney's Office and the Financial Crimes Division of the FBI. This hearing is adjourned." She slammed the gavel down one final time. The sharp crack echoed through the room, sealing their fate. I did not wait to watch them be escorted out. I did not gloat or offer any final parting words. I turned my back on the screaming, arguing ruins of my family, picked up my battered leather briefcase, and walked out of the courtroom. The heavy oak doors swung shut behind me, cutting off the sounds of their destruction. I walked out of the courthouse and into the bright Atlanta sunlight, taking a deep, clean breath of fresh air. I pulled my cell phone from my pocket and dialed a number I had memorized over the weekend. A crisp, professional voice answered on the second ring. "Special Agent Miller, FBI Financial Crimes Division." "Agent Miller, this is Naomi Sterling," I said, keeping my pace steady as I walked down the courthouse steps. "I am calling to follow up on the email I sent you regarding the Sterling Family Ministry. I believe you will find the property deed I attached particularly interesting." The judge just froze their assets, but I have a feeling Chloe Sterling is going to try to liquidate that commercial property before the federal hold officially hits the banking system. You might want to intercept her at her broker's office. There was a slight pause on the other end of the line, followed by the unmistakable sound of a keyboard clattering. "Miss Sterling, we received your dossier. The evidence is incredibly comprehensive. We are moving units into position now." I hung up the phone and slipped it back into my pocket. They thought they could discard me. They thought they could starve a child and use the church as a shield for their greed. They underestimated the quiet, discarded daughter. I walked toward my car feeling a profound sense of peace. I was going back to the hospital. I was going back to Zuri. The war was officially over, and I was the only one left standing. After sending the encrypted file to the IRS, I had one final crucial errand before the weekend was over. To secure permanent legal guardianship at the emergency hearing on Monday morning, the family court required Zuri's original certified birth certificate. My father kept every official family document locked inside a massive fireproof safe in his private administrative suite at the Sterling Family Ministry. It was his way of maintaining ultimate control over our legal identities and tethering us to his empire. I drove across town and parked in the sprawling 10-acre lot of the megachurch. The building was a monument to Isaiah Sterling's ego-boasting towering stained glass windows and imported marble columns that cost more than most of his congregation earned in a lifetime. I bypassed the main sanctuary and headed straight for the executive wing. Using an old access code that they had arrogantly forgotten to deactivate, I slipped inside the quiet, dimly lit archive room. The heavy safe was unlocked. They were always so careless with their power. I quickly located the thick folder labeled with Zuri's name, pulled out the crisp, blue stamped birth certificate, and slipped it securely into my leather briefcase. The heavy oak door suddenly slammed shut behind me. I turned around to find Marcus leaning against the door frame, blocking the only exit. He looked impeccably groomed in a tailored navy suit, but his eyes were completely manic. He was riding the high of Chloe's viral internet video, convinced they had utterly destroyed my life in the public eye. "You really have a death wish, Naomi," Marcus sneered, pushing himself off the doorframe and stepping into the room. "You thought you could outsmart us. My wife has the entire country calling for your head right now. Your accounting firm is burning to the ground. Your reputation is completely incinerated. You have absolutely nothing left." He reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a thick paper-banded stack of $100 bills. He did not hand the money to me. He raised his arm and threw it violently directly at my face. The heavy stack struck my cheekbone with a sharp sting before hitting the polished hardwood floor. The paper band snapped, scattering $5,000 in crisp currency across the room. "Take it and get out," Marcus barked, his voice dripping with venomous superiority. "Take that pathetic handout and disappear. On Monday morning in court, I am taking that little brat back. You are going to drop these ridiculous abuse allegations, and you are going to crawl back into whatever miserable hole you came from. You will always be a loser, Naomi. Always." I looked down at the carpet of stolen money surrounding my feet. I did not rub my cheek where the stack had hit me. I did not flinch or show him a single ounce of the fear he was so desperately trying to provoke. Instead, I took a slow, deliberate step forward, bringing the sharp stiletto heel of my shoe down hard onto the center of a $100 bill. I twisted my heel, grinding the cash directly into the floorboards. I looked up and met my brother's arrogant gaze with a cold, deadpan smile. "Enjoy it, Marcus," I said, my voice dropping to a chilling, unbothered whisper. "I hear federal prison uniforms do not have pockets to hold money." 2 weeks after the emergency injunction froze their assets, the temporary dust settled, revealing the stark, unforgiving reality of the final evidentiary hearing. The federal investigation had already locked down the Sterling family ministry accounts, but Marcus and his high-priced legal team were still desperately fighting in family court. They tried to argue that the financial discrepancies were a separate federal matter, entirely disconnected from Marcus's fitness as a father. They wanted Zuri back. They needed her back to use as a sympathetic pawn in their impending federal defense. They thought they could still manipulate the system, but Judge Vance was not interested in their legal gymnastics. She called me to the witness stand. I did not walk up the wooden steps simply as a concerned aunt. I was sworn in under oath as an official expert witness, a senior forensic accountant brought in to testify on the exact nature of the stolen assets. I adjusted the microphone and plugged my encrypted laptop directly into the courtroom's central projection system. A massive digital screen descended behind the judge's bench, casting a bright white glow over the somber room. Let the record show the undeniable truth. I began, my voice ringing with absolute crystal clarity across the silent courtroom. I clicked a button, and a complex color-coded financial flowchart illuminated the room. The graphic detailed the intricate web of shell companies, offshore accounts, and fake charitable grants. "The defense wants to separate the money from the child." I continued, locking eyes with Harrison Cole, who was sweating profusely and tapping his pen against his legal pad. "They want you to believe that financial mismanagement has nothing to do with physical custody. But you cannot separate the two when the theft directly resulted in the child's physical neglect and prolonged suffering." I clicked to the next slide. A stark bank statement appeared highlighted in bright yellow ink. Chloe Sterling sat on this very stand and swore under oath that she loved Zuri like her own flesh and blood. I said, turning my gaze to where Chloe sat looking pale and terrified. She wept for the cameras and claimed she provided a loving, nurturing home. So I must ask this court a very simple question. I clicked the presenter remote again. Two images popped up side by side. On the left was a withdrawal slip from Zuri's Educational and Medical Trust. On the right was a dealership receipt for a luxury vehicle stamped with the exact same date. Chloe says she loves this child. I projected my voice, ensuring every syllable landed like a physical blow against the defense table. Then why did $50,000 of Zuri's dedicated education fund turn into the exact customized Porsche that Chloe is currently driving and parking right outside this courthouse? A collective gasp rippled through the gallery. Several reporters in the back row began typing frantically. Chloe shrank down in her seat, crossing her arms defensively and refusing to look at the judge. I did not stop to let them breathe. I clicked to the next slide. Another set of documents illuminated the dark room, showing wire transfers authorized by Isaiah Sterling. And why did Zuri's emergency health insurance money, the exact funds designated to cover her severe asthma treatments and inhalers, get directly wired into Pastor Isaiah Sterling's personal offshore banking account? I demanded. While this child was locked in a damp, unventilated basement struggling to breathe without her medication, her biological father and her stepmother were actively liquidating her life-saving medical funds to finance their luxury car payments and designer wardrobes. Marcus jumped out of his chair, his face burning bright red, his fists clenched at his sides. That is circumstantial. You cannot prove that money was meant for her medication. You are twisting the facts. Sit down, Mr. Sterling, Judge Vance roared, pointing a sharp wooden gavel directly at him. One more outburst and I will have you gagged and held in a holding cell for the remainder of this trial. Marcus sank back into his chair, defeated and trembling with rage. Harrison Cole put a restraining hand on his client's shoulder, looking completely, thoroughly beaten. I clicked to the final slide showing the ultimate consolidation of the stolen wealth into Chloe's commercial real estate purchase. I can prove everything, Your Honor, I stated calmly, resting my hands on the edge of the witness stand. I have traced every single diverted penny from the day Maya Sterling died to this exact moment. They systematically starved a child both financially and physically to feed their own greed. They used a tax-exempt religious institution to launder an orphan's inheritance. This is not just poor financial management or a simple accounting error. This is calculated child abuse driven by pure, unrelenting avarice. I turned off the projector. The massive screen went black, leaving the courtroom in a heavy, suffocating silence. Judge Vance stared at the dark screen for a long time. The disgusted expression on her face was absolute. She looked down at Marcus and Chloe, as if they were a disease that had infected her courtroom. She slowly gathered her papers, squaring them neatly on her desk, before picking up her wooden gavel. The air in the room felt electric thick with the anticipation of a final devastating blow. In my 20 years on the bench, I have presided over countless custody disputes. Judge Vance began, her voice shaking with a deep, controlled fury. I have seen neglect. I have seen poor parenting. I have seen families torn apart by addiction and poverty. But I have rarely witnessed such a depraved, orchestrated, and malicious campaign to destroy a child's life for pure financial gain. You did not just fail to protect your daughter, Mr. Sterling. You actively conspired to rob her of her future, her health, and her basic human safety. Marcus opened his mouth to speak, his eyes pleading for leniency, but the judge cut him off instantly. Do not speak, she commanded, her voice slicing through the room. You have completely lost that right. Based on the overwhelming and irrefutable financial evidence presented today, combined with the child's own harrowing testimony, I am making my final ruling. Marcus Sterling, I am immediately and permanently stripping you of all parental rights. You are deemed entirely unfit. You will have no legal, physical, or emotional claim to this child ever again. She turned her gaze to me, her stern expression softening into one of profound respect. Full permanent legal and physical custody of Zuri Sterling is hereby awarded to Naomi Sterling. Furthermore, this court is issuing a permanent restraining order against Marcus and Chloe Sterling. You are forbidden from coming within 500 feet of the child, her school, or her legal guardian. This hearing is adjourned. The gavel cracked against the sounding block with the deafening force of a gunshot. It was over. The definitive finality of the ruling washed over me like a cleansing rain. Zuri was safe. She was legally, unconditionally mine to protect, and they could never hurt her again. The courtroom immediately erupted into frantic movement. The gallery murmured loudly as the bailiffs moved to secure the area and usher people toward the exits. But the real explosion happened directly at the defense table. Chloe spun around to face Marcus, her carefully constructed fragile victim persona completely disintegrating into rabid, terrifying hostility. "You promised me we were covered," Chloe screamed, her voice echoing shrilly across the emptying room, her face twisted into an ugly mask of rage. "You promised me she could not touch us. You useless, pathetic excuse for a man. I gave up everything to play the perfect wife for this family, and you let her take it all away." Marcus grabbed her arm, trying to pull her toward the exit to avoid a public spectacle. "Keep your voice down, Chloe," he hissed, his eyes darting toward the reporters still lingering in the back. "The federal agents are probably waiting outside right now. We have to go." "Do not touch me," she shrieked, slapping his hand away with brutal force. "You are going to federal prison, Marcus. You dragged me into your mess, and now I am going to lose my property because you could not control your own sister. You are worthless." They stood there tearing each other apart, the perfect facade of their holy union crumbling into toxic resentment and mutual destruction. The loyalty of thieves never lasts when the money runs out. I stepped down from the witness stand, picked up my leather briefcase, and walked calmly down the center aisle. I did not rush. I took my time, enjoying the feeling of the solid, unquestionable ground beneath my feet. As I approached their table, Marcus and Chloe stopped screaming at each other for a fraction of a second. They turned and glared at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. I did not stop walking. I did not look back. I just leaned in slightly as I passed their frozen, bitter faces and whispered a simple, quiet promise. "This is just the beginning." I walked out of the courtroom, leaving them to choke on the ashes of the empire they had tried to build on a little girl's suffering. The heavy mahogany doors of the courtroom swung open and a profound silence fell over the gallery. The bailiff gently led Zuri into the room. She looked impossibly small, dwarfed by the towering wooden benches and the oppressive formality of the legal system. She was wearing a simple yellow dress I had bought for her, the fabric soft and cheerful, but her posture was rigid with terror. She clutched a worn, stuffed rabbit tightly against her chest, her knuckles turning white. Judge Vance removed her reading glasses and leaned forward over the high bench. Her usually stern expression softened into something resembling maternal concern. She had cleared the gallery of spectators and reporters, leaving only the legal teams and the immediate family. The air in the room was thick and suffocating. "Zuri," the judge said, her voice low and steady, "you do not need to be afraid. You are safe here. I just need you to answer a few questions about your life at home. Can you do that for me?" Zuri nodded slowly, but her eyes instantly darted toward the defense table. Beatrice Sterling sat perfectly upright in her tailored Chanel suit. Her face was a mask of aristocratic grace, but her eyes were lethal. She stared directly at Zuri, her gaze burning with a cold, silent threat. It was the same look of absolute aristocratic malice she used to control our entire family for decades. A look that promised severe, merciless punishment for stepping out of line. Zuri flinched, visibly shrinking back toward the bailiff. I felt a surge of protective rage spike through my chest. I wanted to leap across the aisle and physically shield her from that toxic woman, but I forced myself to remain completely still, keeping my expression neutral. I caught Zuri's eye and offered a small, reassuring nod. "Tell me about your bedroom, Zuri," Judge Vance asked, reviewing a file on her desk. "Where do you sleep in your father's house?" Zuri took a shaky breath. Her small voice echoed in the cavernous room. "In the basement." she whispered. The basement. The judge repeated, furrowing her brow. You mean a finished lower-level suite? A guest room? No, ma'am. Zuri replied, her grip tightening on the stuffed rabbit. The storage room next to the water heater. It does not have any windows. It is always cold. Harrison Cole. Marcus's high-priced attorney immediately stood up. Objection, Your Honor. The child is clearly exaggerating. The Sterling estate is a 10,000-square-foot mansion. There is absolutely no reason a child would be sleeping in an unfinished storage area. Overruled. Judge Vance snapped, glaring at the attorney. The witness will answer the question without interruption. Why did you sleep down there, Zuri? Zuri looked down at her shoes. Chloe said I made too much noise. She said the house needed absolute silence so she could focus on her important charity work. She told me my breathing was too loud when my asthma acted up, so she put a cot in the storage room. Sometimes she would lock the door from the outside so I would not wander around and ruin the pristine carpets. The court reporter stopped typing for a fraction of a second, her eyes widening in horror before her fingers resumed flying across the keys. I could hear the sharp intake of breath from the bailiff standing nearby. And what about your meals, Zuri? The judge pressed her voice, losing its gentle cadence and taking on a sharp edge of judicial scrutiny. What did Chloe and your father feed you? Zuri hesitated again, glancing fearfully at Marcus, who was furiously scribbling notes on a legal pad, refusing to look at his own daughter. Chloe did not like cooking for me. Zuri explained, her voice trembling. She said I was a burden. She would give me whatever was left on the plates after they finished eating in the formal dining room. Sometimes it was just cold rice or expired yogurt. If I complained, she said I was ungrateful for the roof over my head. The absolute depravity of their actions hung heavily in the sterile courtroom air. They had treated this brilliant, innocent child worse than a stray animal while publicly parading her around as a symbol of their holy benevolence. That was the breaking point. Pastor Isaiah Sterling could no longer maintain his pious, dignified facade. The patriarch of the Sterling Empire slammed both of his hands down violently onto the polished defense table. The loud smack echoed like a gunshot. He shot up from his leather chair, towering over his legal team, his face flushed dark red with righteous indignation. Your Honor, this is an absolute outrage. Isaiah boomed, his deep baritone preacher voice designed to command thousands now unleashed in the confined space of the courtroom. I will not sit here and listen to this child spread these malicious, fabricated lies. Mr. Sterling, sit down immediately. Judge Vance warned, raising her gavel. But Isaiah was completely unhinged, driven by the desperate need to protect his pristine public image. We are a family of immense prestige, he shouted, pointing a trembling finger toward the ceiling. The Sterling family ministry feeds thousands of hungry souls across this city every single week. We fund orphanages. We build community centers. We are pillars of morality and faith in Atlanta. This entire proceeding is nothing but a calculated, vicious smear campaign orchestrated by my estranged, jealous daughter. He turned his blazing, furious eyes toward me. Naomi has always been bitter. He sneered, his lip curling with disgust. She is using this confused, troubled child to extort us and drag our holy ministry through the mud. This child is a chronic liar who requires intense psychological discipline, not a change of custody. Bailiff, Judge Vance shouted, hammering her gavel repeatedly against the wooden block. Restrain that man or remove him from my courtroom. The bailiff stepped forward, placing a firm hand on Isaiah's shoulder, pushing the furious pastor back into his seat. Beatrice quickly grabbed her husband's arm, whispering frantically into his ear, pulling him back behind the shield of their wealth and status. The courtroom descended into a heavy, suffocating silence. Judge Vance let out a long, weary sigh. She took off her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. I watched her carefully, tracking every micro-expression on her face. I knew exactly what was happening in her mind. The systemic bias of the family court system was kicking in. She was looking at the Sterling family. She saw their custom-tailored suits, their expensive lawyers, and their undeniable generational wealth. She saw a powerful, influential family that could offer a child private tutors, gated security, and a massive estate. Then she looked at me, a single working woman living in a modest apartment, currently estranged from the very empire that built this city. The judge cleared her throat and began to speak, her tone shifting into a detached legal cadence. This court recognizes the deeply concerning nature of the child's testimony. However, the court must also consider the holistic environment and the long-term stability of the minor. The Sterling family possesses vast resources and an established support system. While the current living arrangements under Marcus and Chloe Sterling are highly problematic, I must weigh the overall benefit of keeping the child within the affluent extended family structure. She paused, resting her hand on the wooden handle of her gavel. My heart hammered against my ribs. She was going to do it. She was going to rule in favor of the grandparents. She was going to hand Zuri right back to the monsters who created this nightmare simply because they had money and power. It is the preliminary finding of this court that physical custody should be temporarily transferred to the paternal grandparents Isaiah and Beatrice Sterling, pending a full psychological evaluation of the child. She raised the gavel, preparing to strike the block and seal Zuri's fate. The smug, victorious smirk that crawled across Beatrice Sterling's face was the match that lit the powder keg in my soul. I pushed my chair back, the wooden legs scraping loudly against the floor. I stood up to my full height, my posture rigid and unyielding. "Your Honor," I said, my voice slicing through the thick tension of the room, sharp and undeniable. Judge Vance froze the gavel, hovering in midair. "Miss Sterling, I am issuing my ruling. You are out of order." I reached down and unlatched the heavy brass locks of my leather briefcase. The sharp clicks echoed in the silent room. "Before you strike that gavel and return this child to a house of horrors, I request immediate permission to submit evidence number 4. I stated, my eyes locked dead onto the judge. "Because the wealth and resources you just cited do not belong to them, and I'm about to prove exactly how they stole it." Just 24 hours earlier, the pristine illusion of the Sterling Empire had suffered its first fatal fracture. I had watched with cold satisfaction from the courthouse steps as Chloe frantically dragged her oversized designer suitcase across the pavement, desperately trying to reach her Porsche. She thought she could outrun the law. She thought she could quickly liquidate the commercial retail complex she had bought with Zuri's stolen money and flee to her mother's estate in the Hamptons before the asset freeze took full effect. But she was completely outmatched. I had already forwarded the exact deed transfers, routing numbers, and offshore account details to the FBI and the IRS the moment Judge Vance issued her ruling. When Chloe finally reached her luxury car, she was not met by freedom. She was met by 6 armed federal agents stepping out of unmarked black SUVs. I stood completely still and watched her pale, heavily powdered face drain of all remaining color as the cold steel handcuffs snapped violently around her wrists. She screamed and sobbed, dropping her leather bag to the asphalt as she was arrested for wire fraud and money laundering in broad daylight. Marcus had witnessed the entire humiliating scene through the glass doors of the courthouse lobby. Instead of rushing outside to defend his wife, my brave older brother had spun around like a terrified child. He sprinted out the back exit, diving into the tinted back seat of our parents' waiting town car and speeding away, leaving his wife to take the federal fall alone. With Chloe sitting in a cold federal holding cell and Marcus permanently stripped of his parental rights, a normal family would have retreated into quiet disgrace. They would have hidden from the public eye and prepared for the impending legal storm. But Isaiah and Beatrice Sterling were not normal. They were raging narcissists, fueled by public adoration and unimaginable greed. They did the only thing they knew how to do when cornered by the truth. They threw a massive party. Saturday night was the Sterling Family Ministry annual Grand Gala. It was a spectacular high society fundraising event designed to solicit massive charitable donations from Atlanta's elite. They desperately needed an influx of untraceable cash to replenish the trust funds I had frozen, and they needed a spectacular public relations miracle to spin the impending federal indictments. I made sure Zuri was tucked safely into a warm, comfortable bed in my apartment, guarded by a private security contractor I had hired that morning. Then I prepared for war. I did not come to the gala to hide in the shadows. I wore a striking tailored crimson red silk gown that draped perfectly to the floor. It was a deliberate choice. In a room full of conservative black tuxedos and muted pastel dresses, I looked like a blazing warning sign. I was the color of blood and the color of reckoning. I pulled my car up to the valet at the downtown Ritz-Carlton and stepped out into the humid evening air. The grand ballroom was a monument to their unchecked gluttony. Towering crystal chandeliers cast a sparkling glow over tables draped in white silk. Massive ice sculptures carved into the shape of doves melted slowly near the champagne bars. Waiters in pristine white gloves circulated through the crowd of politicians, wealthy investors, and oblivious church members holding silver trays of caviar and filet mignon. As I walked through the towering double doors, the ambient hum of polite conversation began to drop. It started near the entrance and rippled outward like a wave. People turned their heads, their champagne flutes hovering near their lips. They had all heard the rumors circulating through the city. They knew Marcus had lost custody. They knew Chloe had been arrested. And seeing the estranged daughter walking straight into the lion's den sent a shockwave of scandalous electricity through the room. I kept my spine perfectly straight and my gaze fixed straight ahead. I did not make it past the second ice sculpture before she intercepted me. Beatrice Sterling materialized from the crowd blocking my path. She wore an emerald green gown and a heavy diamond necklace that I knew for a fact was purchased with funds skimmed from the church's orphanage charity. Her face was pulled tight into a mask of aristocratic grace for the onlookers, but her eyes were lethal. She grabbed my arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging painfully into my skin, and forcefully pulled me behind a large floral arrangement out of direct view of the main floor. "Get out!" Beatrice hissed, her voice trembling with a suppressed demonic rage. "Get out of this building right now! I do not have a daughter! You are a traitor and a disgrace!" I looked down at the hand gripping my arm and then stared directly into her cold eyes. "That is a relief, Beatrice, because I was starting to worry I shared your DNA," I replied, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "You have destroyed this family." She spat, her chest heaving as she struggled to keep her voice below a shout. "You put your own sister-in-law in a jail cell. You took my granddaughter. You are ruining your father's life work. You are a bitter, jealous little girl who could never stand to see Marcus succeed." I brushed her hand off my arm with a look of pure disgust. "Marcus is currently hiding in the VIP lounge, drowning himself in scotch, because he is too much of a coward to face the people he stole from," I said, stepping closer to her, forcing her to look up at me. "And do not ever speak to me about Zuri. You wore those diamonds around your neck while your own flesh and blood slept on a concrete floor next to a water heater. You do not care about family. You only care about the bank accounts attached to them." Beatrice's face twisted into an ugly snarl. "You think you have won," she whispered venomously. "You think one court order makes you a hero? My husband is about to go on that stage and raise $2 million in 1 hour. These people love us. They believe in us. You are nothing but a minor inconvenience, Naomi. I will have security throw you out onto the street where you belong." I smiled a cold, humorless smile. "Go ahead and call them. I challenge you. Have your security guards put their hands on a licensed federal witness in front of the mayor and the city council. The FBI agents watching this hotel from the street would love the excuse to come inside and shut this entire gala down right now." Beatrice froze. The blood drained from her face as she frantically scanned the room, suddenly realizing how precarious their situation truly was. She knew I was not bluffing. She turned on her heel and practically fled toward the staging area, her emerald dress swishing angrily behind her. I stepped out from behind the floral arrangement and turned my attention to the front of the ballroom. The lights dimmed slightly, and a dramatic spotlight illuminated the main stage. Pastor Isaiah Sterling strode up to the podium. He looked immaculate in a custom-tailored tuxedo, his silver hair perfectly coiffed. He gripped the edges of the wooden lectern, projecting an aura of righteous sorrow. My dear friends, Isaiah began, his booming baritone voice echoing through the massive sound system. We gather here tonight during a season of profound spiritual warfare. The devil is attacking this family. The enemy is trying to tear down the holy work we have built in this city. We are facing trials and tribulations that would break an ordinary man. He paused, pulling a pristine white handkerchief from his pocket and dabbing at his dry eyes. It was a masterful, flawless performance. The audience was completely captivated, hanging on to his every deceptive word. They are attacking my son. They are attacking our finances. They are trying to silence our ministry. Isaiah continued, his voice rising with practiced, passionate intensity. But I stand before you tonight unbroken. I ask you to open your hearts and your checkbooks. Stand with us in this dark hour. Help us raise the funds to fight these malicious lies and protect the holy legacy of the Sterling family. I began to walk. I stepped smoothly down the center aisle of the ballroom, my red silk dress flowing behind me. The heavy rhythmic click of my stiletto heels seemed to echo perfectly against the marble floor. The crowd parted instinctively as I moved forward. Several heavy-set security guards in dark suits stepped into the aisle to intercept me. I did not slow my pace. I simply locked eyes with the head of security, a man who had known me since I was a teenager. I gave him a look of absolute unyielding warning. He hesitated, glancing nervously toward the stage, before taking a slow, deliberate step backward. Isaiah saw me approaching. His booming voice faltered for a fraction of a second. His knuckles turned white as he gripped the podium. He tried to continue his emotional plea, but his eyes betrayed his rising panic. He knew exactly what was walking toward him. I reached the front of the ballroom and ascended the 3 carpeted steps to the main stage. The entire room of 500 high society donors sat in a stunned, breathless silence. I walked directly up to my father. He tried to block the microphone, his face flushed with sweat and terror. "Naomi, what are you doing?" Isaiah hissed under his breath, his charismatic smile completely vanishing. "Do not do this." I did not answer him. I reached out and clamped my hand firmly over his wrist, prying his fingers off the microphone stand. I shoved my shoulder against his chest, pushing the great Pastor Sterling aside. I grabbed the microphone, pulling it free from its mount. A sharp screech of audio feedback pierced the quiet ballroom, making several guests wince. I stood at the absolute center of the stage, looking out over the sea of glittering diamonds and expensive suits. I took a slow, deep breath, feeling the undeniable weight of the truth burning in my chest. For my entire life, I was told to be quiet. I said, my voice projecting through the massive ballroom speakers, steady and unyielding. I was taught that the Sterling name meant sacrifice, charity, and above all else, unquestioning loyalty to the man standing behind me. A pin drop could have been heard in that colossal room. The clinking of silverware had completely ceased. Hundreds of Atlanta's most influential citizens stared up at me, their faces pale in the dramatic spotlight. Behind me, I could hear Isaiah's ragged breathing. He stepped forward, trying to reach for the microphone cord, but I turned sharply, flashing him a glare so lethal it froze him in his tracks. "Tonight, my father stood before you and asked for your generosity." I continued, turning back to the sea of wealthy donors. He spun a beautiful tale of spiritual warfare and persecution. He asked you to open your checkbooks to protect this holy ministry. But I am not here to ask for your money. I am here as a certified forensic accountant to tell you exactly where your past donations have gone. Beatrice Sterling shrieked from the side of the stage. "Turn off the microphone. Cut the sound." The sound technician high up in the balcony booth did not move. He was a young guy I had helped with his taxes 2 years ago. He just crossed his arms and watched. "You believe you are donating to a respectable, pious pastor." I projected my voice louder, drowning out my mother's frantic screaming. "You believe your thousands of dollars are building community centers and feeding the hungry souls of Atlanta. But did you know that the $200,000 raised last month for the new youth annex was completely liquidated within 48 hours? It did not buy bricks or books. It was wired directly to a high-risk bail bondsman to keep my brother Marcus out of a federal holding cell." A collective gasp ripped through the audience. The polite, wealthy restraint of the crowd instantly vanished, replaced by loud murmurs of outrage and shock. Isaiah lunged forward, grabbing my shoulder. "That is a lie!" he bellowed, his face contorted in a mix of panic and fury. "She is a disturbed, bitter woman. Security, remove her right now." I did not flinch. I reached into my leather briefcase resting on the edge of the podium and pulled out a thick stack of glossy red folders. I stepped down the short stairs directly into the front row. This row was reserved exclusively for the Sterling Family Ministry Board of Directors, the men and women who officially oversaw the church's governance and approved my father's exorbitant salary. I handed the first red folder to Deacon Arthur Hayes, a stern, elderly man who had been my father's closest ally for 30 years. I handed the next to Mrs. Eleanor Vance, the chair of the Charity Committee. I passed out 10 folders in total, making sure every single board member had one in their hands. "Do not take my word for it," I said, standing directly in front of Deacon Hayes. "Open the folders." Deacon Hayes hesitated, his eyes darting to my father on the stage before slowly opening the red cover. The other board members followed suit. Inside those folders you will find certified bank statements, offshore routing numbers, and wire transfer logs. I declared, my voice ringing with absolute authority. Page 1 details the youth annex funds moving into Marcus's legal defense account. Page 3 shows how the orphanage charity was skimmed to purchase Beatrice Sterling's emerald and diamond necklace currently resting on her neck. Page 7 tracks the supposedly anonymous foreign donations directly into Isaiah's personal Cayman Islands retirement fund. Deacon Hayes stared at the highlighted documents. His hands began to shake. The color drained from his face as his eyes tracked the undeniable paper trail of theft and deception. He looked up at my father, and the deep reverence that had existed in his eyes for decades was instantly replaced by pure, unadulterated disgust. Isaiah was frantic. He leaned over the podium, sweat pouring down his temples. "Arthur, do not look at that fabricated garbage. It is a trick. She hacked the systems and manipulated the data. Guards, I said, get her out of here." 2 massive security guards finally broke through the crowd, rushing down the center aisle toward me. Their hands reached out to grab my arms. "Stop right there!" Deacon Hayes roared, standing up from his front row seat. His voice carried the booming authority of a military veteran. The security guards froze, looking between the enraged pastor on the stage and the furious head of the board of directors. "No one touches her!" Deacon Hayes commanded, pointing a trembling finger at the guards. He turned his furious gaze back to the stage, holding up the red folder. "Is this true, Isaiah? Did you funnel the congregation's tithes to keep your son out of federal prison? Did you steal from the orphans? Arthur, you have known me for 30 years. Isaiah pleaded, his charismatic mask completely slipping away to reveal the desperate, pathetic fraud underneath. "You know my heart. We can discuss this in private. This is an attack by the enemy. The enemy is standing on that stage wearing a custom tuxedo bought with stolen money," Eleanor Vance shouted, standing up beside Deacon Hayes. She threw her red folder onto the ground in disgust. "We trusted you. We brought our friends and families to this church. You are a thief and a disgrace." The breaking of the board of directors was the final fatal blow to the Sterling Empire. The ballroom erupted into absolute chaos. The carefully curated high society gala transformed into a riot of betrayed donors. People were shouting angry accusations toward the stage. Investors who had just written 5-figure checks were frantically rushing to the administrative tables, demanding their checks be canceled and returned immediately. Beatrice ran onto the stage, grabbing my father's arm, her perfectly styled hair now a messy, frazzled halo around her pale face. "Please, everyone calm down," she yelled into the microphone, her voice shrill and desperate. "This is a misunderstanding. We are a family of God. You are a family of parasites," a wealthy real estate developer shouted from the back of the room. "I am calling the Attorney General first thing on Monday." The exodus began. It was not a slow, polite departure. It was a stampede of wealthy, influential elites desperate to distance themselves from the radioactive fallout of the Sterling family. Chairs were knocked over. Champagne glasses shattered against the marble floor. Women in expensive gowns and men in tailored suits shoved past each other heading for the grand exit doors. They looked at my parents not with the adoration and respect they had commanded for decades, but with absolute utter revulsion. I stood in the center of the emptying room watching the destruction unfold. It was magnificent. The towering crystal chandeliers still sparkled, and the ice sculptures continued to melt, but the kingdom was officially dead. My father collapsed into a chair on the stage, burying his face in his hands. His broad shoulders shook as the reality of his absolute ruin crashed down upon him. There would be no recovery from this. The FBI already had the financial records. The board of directors had turned against him. His wealthy benefactors were currently fleeing the hotel in droves. Beatrice stood over him, her face twisted into a mask of pure terror. She looked out at the empty ballroom, the overturned chairs, the abandoned plates of expensive food. Her entire identity, her social standing, her wealth and her power had been completely tied to the illusion of perfection. Now she was nothing but the disgraced wife of a fraudulent pastor facing federal indictment. I slowly walked back up the stairs onto the stage. The sound of my heels echoing in the rapidly emptying room made my mother flinch. She turned to me, her eyes wide with a frantic, trapped animal panic. "Are you happy now?" Beatrice sobbed, her voice cracking. "You have destroyed everything. We have nothing left. You took my son. You took my granddaughter. Now you have taken our church. You are a monster." I stopped a few feet away from them. I did not feel pity. I did not feel guilt. I felt the clean, sharp air of absolute justice. "I did not destroy anything, Beatrice," I said, my voice low and calm. "I simply turned on the lights. You destroyed yourselves the moment you decided an innocent child was a disposable asset. You built a mansion on a foundation of lies and theft. I just knocked out the main pillar." Isaiah slowly raised his head from his hands. His eyes were red-rimmed and defeated. He looked at me as if seeing a complete stranger. "Naomi," he whispered, his voice a pathetic, broken croak. "What happens to us now?" I looked down at the man who had demanded my submission and obedience for my entire life. The man who had starved a child and stolen her future to fund his vanity. I stepped closer, leaning down so only they could hear my final words. "Now," I whispered, my voice colder than the ice melting in the ballroom. "Now you learn what it feels like to have absolutely nothing. And you pray that the federal judge is more merciful than I am." I turned my back on them and walked away. I descended the stage stairs and walked straight through the grand double doors of the ballroom, leaving the ruins of the Sterling family behind me forever. I stepped out into the cool Atlanta night air, taking a deep, refreshing breath. My phone buzzed in my clutch. I pulled it out and saw a message from the private security team. "Zuri is sleeping soundly, safe and secure." A genuine smile spread across my face. I walked toward my car, ready to go home to my daughter. The war was over, and we had finally won. Exactly 1 month had passed since the gala. 30 days since the impenetrable walls of the Sterling Empire had come crashing down in front of 500 elite witnesses. The fallout was not merely a scandal, it was a complete and absolute annihilation. The morning after the gala, the church board of directors held an emergency session. The vote was unanimous. Isaiah Sterling was permanently stripped of his pastoral title, excommunicated from the very ministry he had founded, and barred from setting foot on the church grounds. But the loss of his title was only the beginning of his nightmare. The federal authorities moved with devastating speed. Armed with the meticulous financial dossiers I had provided, the IRS and the FBI launched a joint task force investigation into the Sterling family ministry. Federal agents raided the executive offices, confiscating servers, filing cabinets, and decades' worth of fraudulent financial records. They froze every single bank account tied to Isaiah, Beatrice, and Marcus. They seized the offshore accounts. They locked down the fake charitable grants. Marcus was currently sitting in a federal detention center downtown. He had been denied bail after the prosecutor presented evidence that he posed an extreme flight risk. His brilliant legal team had abandoned him the moment his retainers bounced. Chloe, his perfect supportive wife, had lasted exactly 3 days in federal custody before she broke. She signed a plea deal turning state's evidence and offering to testify against her husband in exchange for a reduced sentence. She filed for divorce from her jail cell. The holy union built on stolen wealth had disintegrated the second the money disappeared, while they rotted in their respective cells, and my parents drowned in a sea of federal subpoenas. My life had transformed into a sanctuary of peace. Zuri was flourishing, the terrified, silent little girl who had clutched a worn stuffed rabbit in the courtroom was slowly fading away. In her place, a bright, curious, and vibrant child was emerging. I enrolled her in an excellent private school. I filled her bedroom with books, art supplies, and bright colors. She ate hot meals at a dining table where she was treated with respect and unconditional love. She was no longer a burden. She was my daughter. I was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows of my corner office, looking out over the sprawling skyline of downtown Atlanta. My forensic accounting firm had doubled in size over the past month. The exposure from the Sterling case had brought in dozens of high-profile clients seeking my expertise. I held a warm cup of coffee in my hand, watching the morning traffic crawl along the busy streets below. The silence of my office was broken by the sharp ring of my private cell phone resting on my mahogany desk. I set my coffee down and picked up the device. The caller ID displayed an unsaved local number. I answered it, keeping my voice professional and detached. Naomi. The voice on the other end of the line was a ragged, pathetic whisper. It was completely unrecognizable from the commanding aristocratic tone that used to terrorize our household. But I knew exactly who it was. "Hello, Beatrice," I replied, my voice as smooth and cold as polished glass. A heavy, trembling sob echoed through the speaker. She was crying. Beatrice Sterling, the woman who had never shed a genuine tear in her entire life, was weeping openly. "Please, Naomi," Beatrice begged, her voice cracking with raw, unfiltered panic. "Please do not hang up on me. You have to listen to me. I have nowhere else to turn. Everyone is gone." I walked slowly back toward the window, my heels sinking into the thick carpet. I did not interrupt her. I let the silence hang deliberately, forcing her to sit in her own desperation. "The attorneys will not return our calls," Beatrice sobbed, her breath hitching wildly. "The congregation treats us like we carry a disease. We cannot even buy groceries without people taking photos of us and screaming insults. But that is not the worst part, Naomi. The bank is coming." She paused, taking a ragged, shuddering breath. "They froze the accounts. They took the cars. And now the bank has issued a final notice of foreclosure on the estate. They are going to seize the house, Naomi. They are coming to throw us out onto the street. We will have absolutely nothing." She was right. The sprawling 10,000-square-foot mansion on Maple Street, the ultimate symbol of their prestige and power, was heavily leveraged. Isaiah had taken out massive secret mortgages against the property to fund his extravagant lifestyle, assuming the church donations would always cover the interest. Without the stolen funds keeping them afloat, the entire house of cards had collapsed. "Naomi, you have to save us!" Beatrice pleaded, her voice rising to a frantic, shrill pitch. "You are so successful now. I see your firm in the news. I see what you have built. You have the money. You can buy the house from the bank. You can pay off the outstanding debt and let us stay." I stared out the window, watching a flock of birds circle a distant glass tower. I felt absolutely nothing for the woman crying on the other end of the line. No pity, no guilt, no remorse. She had starved a child. She had locked my niece in a windowless basement. She had stolen millions from the vulnerable. "We are your family, Naomi," Beatrice cried, her voice dripping with desperate manipulation. "No matter what happened in the past, you are still a Sterling. You are our blood. You cannot let your own flesh and blood be thrown into the street like common criminals. Please, daughter, buy the house for us." I took a slow, deliberate step, tracing the edge of the glass window. The camera of my mind seemed to track in a slow, continuous circle around me, capturing the absolute finality of this moment. I looked down at the streets of Atlanta, the city my parents had once believed they owned. "Mom," I said, my voice soft, calm, and lethally precise. You do not need to worry about the bank foreclosing anymore. I bought that bad debt last week. A sharp gasp of pure, unfiltered relief burst through the phone. Oh, daughter. Beatrice cried out, a hysterical laugh escaping her throat. I knew it. I told your father. I knew you would not abandon us. I knew you would remember your family. I knew you would save us. I let her enjoy that false, fragile hope for exactly 3 seconds. I let her believe she had won. I let her feel the comforting illusion of safety wrapping around her shoulders one last time. Then I tore it away. I bought it under my firm's name. I stated, my voice dropping an octave, the ice in my tone freezing the air between us. And as the new primary creditor, I just signed the eviction notice. The joyful weeping on the other end of the line stopped instantly. A dead, suffocating silence replaced it. You have exactly 24 hours to vacate the premises. I continued, delivering each word with brutal, clinical precision. You will leave the keys on the kitchen counter. You will take only your personal clothing. If you attempt to remove any furniture, any artwork, or any fixtures that belong to the estate, I will have you arrested for theft of property. Naomi. Beatrice whispered the word, carrying a tone of absolute paralyzing horror. You cannot do this. We are your parents. Where will we go? That is entirely your problem. I replied, my gaze fixed on the horizon. The county sheriffs will arrive at noon tomorrow to secure the locks. Do not be inside when they get there. They have strict instructions to forcibly remove trespassers. Please. Beatrice screamed, a guttural, animalistic sound of pure defeat. We will die out there. We have no money, we have no friends. You cannot take our home. It was never your home, I said sharply. It was a monument to your greed. I am going to sell that mansion to the highest commercial bidder, and the proceeds from the sale will go directly back into Zuri's educational trust fund. Every single penny you stole from that little girl is going back to her. Naomi, I am begging you. Beatrice wailed, her voice breaking completely. Do not ever call this number again, I said. I pulled the phone away from my ear and pressed the red button terminating the call. The silence rushed back into my office, clean and perfect. I stood by the window for a long time, watching the morning sun rise higher into the sky, chasing away the shadows of the city. I turned away from the glass and walked back to my desk. I picked up a framed photograph resting next to my computer monitor. It was a picture taken yesterday. Zuri was standing in a sunny park holding a bright red kite, a massive, joyful smile illuminating her face. I traced my thumb gently over the glass frame. The monsters were gone. The empire was ashes, and our new life was just beginning. I pressed the red button on my screen, cutting off Beatrice's frantic shrieking mid-sentence. The sharp click of the disconnecting line echoed in my office. The silence that followed was absolute and profound. I set the phone face down on the polished mahogany desk. There was no regret in my chest. There was no second guessing, and absolutely no guilt. There was only the quiet, clean air of a life finally swept free of toxic debris. I took a deep breath, letting the reality of the moment settle into my bones. The Sterling Empire was completely dismantled, reduced to nothing but cautionary headlines, federal indictments, and frozen bank accounts. For 34 years, I had been designated as the family scapegoat. I was the ungrateful daughter, the difficult child who refused to smile for the cameras and sweep the ugliness under their expensive Persian rugs. They thought casting me out would break me. They truly believed that cutting off my access to their corrupt wealth would eventually force me to come crawling back, begging for scraps from Isaiah's table. They assumed I would fail without their name to protect me. Instead, it gave me the ultimate freedom. It gave me the clarity and the distance to build my own firm block by block, ledger by ledger, until I possessed the exact tools necessary to tear down their facade. I walked over to the glass wall, looking down at the bustling Atlanta streets. Down there, people were going about their daily lives entirely oblivious to the fact that one of the city's most untouchable religious dynasties had just been evicted from their own false kingdom. The weather was beautiful. The sky was a clear, piercing blue. I packed up my briefcase, sliding the final signed eviction notice and the trust fund transfer documents into my leather satchel. My workday was officially over. There was only one place I needed to be. The drive back to my apartment felt remarkably different today. The air conditioning in my car felt cooler. The music on the radio sounded clearer. The heavy, invisible weight I had carried since childhood, the burden of knowing the truth, but lacking the power to prove it, was finally gone. When I pulled into my secure parking garage and rode the elevator up to my floor, I felt a profound sense of anticipation. I unlocked my front door and pushed it open. I was not met with the suffocating tension of the Sterling mansion or the cold echo of a lonely life. I was met with the smell of baking chocolate chip cookies and the sound of bright, genuine laughter. I stepped into the sunlit living room, dropping my keys onto the entryway table. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind me, sealing out the rest of the world and locking in the peace. Aunt Naomi. The joyful shout rang out from the kitchen down the hallway. Zuri came sprinting around the corner, her bare feet padding rapidly against the hardwood floor. The transformation in her over the past month was nothing short of miraculous. The dark circles that used to haunt her eyes were completely gone. Her cheeks were full and flushed with a healthy pink glow. She wore a pair of bright denim overalls and a yellow t-shirt, completely free of the rigid, uncomfortable designer dresses Chloe used to force her into for public appearances. She did not flinch when doors closed anymore. She no longer tried to hoard bread in her pockets, terrified of when her next meal would come. She was just a normal, happy child. She crashed into my legs, wrapping her small arms tightly around my waist. I dropped my leather briefcase to the floor and knelt down, pulling her into a fierce, protective embrace. She smelled like vanilla soap and chocolate. I buried my face in her curly hair, holding her against my chest. "I made something for you today," Zuri announced, pulling back slightly. Her eyes were sparkling with uncontained excitement. My private security contractor, a kind retired police officer named Marcus, who doubled as her daytime nanny, walked out of the kitchen wiping flour from his hands and giving me a warm, knowing smile. "What did you make for me, baby?" I asked, brushing a stray curl out of her eyes. Zuri reached into the front pocket of her denim overalls. She pulled out a carefully folded piece of thick white construction paper. She smoothed it out against my chest with her small hands and proudly presented it to me. I took the paper gently. It was a crayon drawing done with bold, heavy strokes of color. It showed two stick figures, one taller and one smaller, standing side by side. They were holding hands. Surrounding them was a bright green field dotted with messy red flowers. But the most prominent feature of the drawing was a massive, bright yellow sun taking up the entire top half of the page, casting warm, thick rays over the two figures. There were no dark basements in this picture. There were no cold storage rooms. There were no monsters lurking in the shadows. There was just brilliant, undeniable light. "That is us." Zuri pointed a small finger at the two figures looking up at me with absolute trust. "That is you and me in the sun." A heavy lump formed in my throat, but I swallowed it down, replaced by a fierce, overwhelming surge of maternal love. I had fought a war against the most powerful people in this city to secure this exact moment. "It is beautiful, Zuri," I whispered, kissing the top of her forehead. "It is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen in my entire life. We are going to frame it and put it right in the center of the living room." I stood up, lifting her effortlessly into my arms. She wrapped her legs around my waist and rested her head securely against my shoulder, perfectly safe and perfectly loved. I held her close and turned my gaze slowly toward the large bay window at the far end of the room, feeling the warmth of the actual sun streaming through the glass. The camera of my life seemed to pull back, capturing the quiet, perfect sanctuary we had built together. The contrast between the cold, sterile courtroom, the chaotic gala, and this warm, sunlit living room was absolute. I looked directly forward, piercing through the invisible barrier separating my world from the past. I thought of Isaiah sitting in disgrace. I thought of Beatrice frantically packing a single suitcase. I thought of Marcus and Chloe in their federal cells. They called me a failure because I refused to play by their corrupt rules. I stated, my voice resonating with cold, absolute certainty. They thought they could discard me, starve this child, and bury their sins in the dark. But they forgot one crucial detail. I held Zuri a little tighter, my expression hardening into a look of ultimate, untouchable triumph. The person who holds the ledger holds the power of life and death. And I have never miscalculated a single cent. The screen cuts to black.